Okay, thank you, Mr. Rajansamy. We're going to move on. We've got a question for the audience today. Has anyone here booked a place to stay or offered their place online, such as Airbnb.com? Has anyone done that here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so a good handful. What is so interesting about the concept behind Airbnb is that when all goes well, users talk about how their notion of traveling, meeting people, their notion of space and time, their notion of sharing, they've all been changed for the better. Well, our next keynote speaker says, you ain't seen nothing yet. The sharing economy and collaborative consumption are making us rethink and reprogram what it means to consume and share. Please help me welcome the Vice President of International at Airbnb, Mr. Martin Reiter.
Hello. Imagine a world where you travel to stay with strangers, to make friends. A world in which you consume without owning. A world in which you do more things you like with spending less. I'd like to talk about revolutioning the way we consume. About a year ago, my wife and I went on a trip. It happens that she is really into old architecture and heritage housing, whilst I really like wine. So we thought about, how can we get those two together? And we decided to travel to San Francisco and up north in the wine county. Now, when we were looking around, we didn't really find a hotel that had this wonderful old Victorian mansions that you find, the painted ladies and others in San Francisco. So what should we do? We happened to look at Airbnb.com, which is a platform that allows people to share their space with others. And actually, we did find a guy, a host, father, born and raised in San Francisco, happened to have such a Victorian house. Beautiful, with wooden ceilings, wooden floors, how we'd imagine it. Also, and it got better, what happened was he was a wine lover. So we started chatting, and suddenly, that idea of traveling somewhere where you don't know anyone went away. And we happened to book a trip. We went there. It was a wonderful welcome. We had a glass of wine together, and then something truly magical happened. It started very simple. He asked us, so how do you want to go there? And I said, I don't really know. I don't even know where to go. He said, I can tell you, but do you have a car? I said, no. He left, suddenly. I found out he was talking to his wife. And then when they come back, he actually said, look, why don't we do it together, the four of us? And we were a little bit flattered and not really used to that was such a wonderful offer. So we said yes, and he said, look, for us, it doesn't happen that often that European wine lovers come to our place and we can share such an experience together. Needless to say, it was a really remarkable trip, and we still talk about it. What happened was we shared something. We didn't just share the space, we shared an experience. And we didn't buy anything of that, we didn't own it. Think of sharing in terms of access, not ownership. Now, what does that mean for you? Who of you here owns a power drill? Let me see your hands. I see one woman there. It's the only woman in the audience that owns a power drill. It's a little bit hard to believe. Now I see a little bit more. I actually think that all of you own a power drill. Now, you buy a power drill, usually not to have a power drill that you put in your living room, just as a design object. You use it because you need a hole in your wall. And actually, I would argue you don't even need a hole in your wall, you want to mount something. And now, I tried that by myself a few weeks ago. Didn't work that well. It helps if someone helps you doing that. So I was really thinking, why do we all buy things that we don't really need or cannot use by ourselves anyway? The interesting thing is, I'm not the only one. The average power drill is actually not used. We all buy things we don't really use, often with money we don't even have. Now, a power drill is not really a big part of our income. But let's think about cars. If you are the average German and you own a car, you spend about 8,000 euros a year on your car. 30 or 40% of your disposable income you spend on space. Now, the car is used in average 1 day a week, and your space is usually not used if you're on vacation. How would your life be if you wouldn't have that weight on your shoulders? How would your life look like if suddenly your disposable income would not be weighed down by those heavy costs? How would your life look like if you could still do all the things you like and more of them with spending less? Today I'd like to talk about 3 things. Why we believe that sharing is in our DNA. Why we believe that today we are at the first time since we abandoned sharing, maybe 100 years ago, where we can get back there in a modern and convenient way. And the third thing is, we'd like to talk about if that is already something that happens today and that we all can use together. Now, when you look back 100 years, and I come from a small village in Austria, in the mountains, very farm-style rural, and I talked to my grandmother. She told me back then, no one would buy farming equipment to harvest crop 2 weeks a year, but you would share that. Every day, you would know everyone in your village, and you would exchange favors to build trust, and to build trust, which builds friendship. Now, why did we move away from that? What has happened? We would argue 3 things happened. The first is that the rise of urbanization eroded that community trust that we naturally had in smaller villages. The second thing is the economic need went away. The industrialization suddenly made it a possibility that every one of us can suddenly buy their own car. And the third thing is the pace of life increased. Instead of going to your neighbors and discussing about who uses the car, maybe somewhere later next week, every one of us today needs to be mobile. And not just in a week from now, but maybe a few days at a time. Now, what's the problem with that? Do we think there is a problem? I would argue there is one. I don't think it's efficient. I don't think it's sustainable. And there's a few things that are just a little bit awkward. When you look at the United States today, we have more shopping malls than high schools. More shopping malls than high schools. Now, when I read it the first time, it took me a few times to really emotionally understand that. The other thing is, we have a rising industry of self-storage. Self-storage means you need a place to put things that you don't really need. If you would need them, you wouldn't put it in a self-storage. And what happens is, after a few months, you might look at what you pay per month for self-storage and find out it's probably more than the stuff is worth. 52,000 self-storage units now exist in the United States. That's about 7 times more than we have Starbucks. Now, can we get back there? We would argue yes. We would argue the time is ripe because there's 4 elements in place. The first one is we see a resurgence in community. The second thing is the world is changing in a way that doesn't even allow us to go on the way we did. The third thing is when you look at the economics, the way, especially after 2008, our purses have tightened. And finally, technology today is in a place that makes it easy. When the Hurricane Katrina happened in New York, we had a host there, which kind of went out and opened her home for whoever was homeless, whoever needed food. And what we saw in that was that even in large metropolitan areas, kindness and a certain openness to your neighbors, to your community, is still there. And what we also see is that people are feeling more and more torn away from the anonymous life we started to live. You see that right now, over the last 10 years, we have 10 times as many farmers markets as we had before. Now, what does that mean? It means that we can connect with each other, which is one of the first prerequisites of the sharing economy. The next thing is, and I just got that out a few days ago, when you type in Germany on Footprint Network, you find out that if all of us would live like the Germans do, we would need about 2.5 worlds to sustain our lifestyle. Maybe we can go on another year, maybe another 5 years, but it's also pretty obvious, I think, to all of us that we can't go on like that forever. The third thing is that I feel we have a very human basic conflict these days. And you saw that in the credit crisis. Every year, we all learn. Every year we grow. Think about our economy. Our companies wouldn't grow. What would that mean? And still, it's not true that all of us can spend more every year. We tried that. We financed it with credit. It didn't work. So how can we sustain our need for consumption in a world where real income for most of us has remained flat over the last decades? I'd like to give a few examples. Evandro, who I met in Rio de Janeiro, he had an accident which didn't allow him to continue his work the way he used to. He was faced with the fact that he probably couldn't sustain his lifestyle and his apartment. He started hosting on Airbnb, and suddenly he just couldn't only make his life, he also met friends. When you look at Roland, he had a similar thing. He built a house together with his wife, only and sadly to find out afterwards that they ended up getting divorced. He couldn't sustain his life the way he did. He started hosting his empty space, and his life changed. Claire and Gary in San Francisco, their children left. They had a large house, children left university, we call them empty nesters. And they were a little lonely. They thought, how can I sustain my house, and how can I fill it with friendship? Finally, we had Tessa in London. She got sick, faced similar problems, and also she, enabled by the sharing economy, was able to keep up her life. Those are a few emotional highlights, but in fact, what happens is all of you can be equally affected by either things changing or opportunities out there. These lie in the shift in the economy that we're about to see. Now, I ask myself, how can we make that practical? Is that something which we can use in our daily lives? Let's take a step back and look a little bit at what happened with the internet. The first big step we saw was that commerce got online. The big trust barrier that we needed to overcome was putting your financial data online. Without your credit card information on Amazon, it's very hard to make a purchase. That step has been very successfully completed. I would argue that most of you have either used Amazon or eBay. The next thing that happened was social connections got online. An equal trust barrier was to overcome, to put your personality online, to get rid of anonymity. I would argue that also this one has been overcome. Now, where are we today? Today, we are a very unique place. Today, we are able to use the internet to bring social connections back offline. Today, we're in a place where you can use the information about other people, the connections that you build on Facebook, to share with them in your real life, to make connections with real people. Now, looking back, we have 4 critical enablers that come together today, this year, last year, and the next years to come, that allow us to move back to where we came from, sharing with our community. This opens very unique new opportunities, and I'd like to talk a little bit about these. Now, how, and a lot of you have their own business. you might ask yourself, how do I make that real for my own business? What do I do with that information? I can share how we look at it in Airbnb. Building a trusted community is the pivotal part of creating a trusted network of sharing. How do you do that? The first thing is you invest heavily in trust. You try to leverage all sources of trust, from reputation to social connections that there are online. The other thing is, and we deeply believe in it, building a community of real people needs real interaction. Our big values are to be personal and local. And in 2012, we opened 12 offices spanning operations for 40 countries. And operations for us means to go out and meet our users. The next thing is environment and economy. We believe that in today's world, to be successful as a company, people want you to do something good. People want you to do something meaningful. They are willing to pay a price for that, but first and foremost, they want to feel part of something that helps us go on the way we want to. Now, when you think about sharing, sharing means we make more out of the assets that we don't use anyway, without producing more, without adding waste. I think like the weight of waste that you produce for a laptop is like a few hundred times its end product weight. All those things only for buying stuff we don't really use. The next thing is financial. By significantly reducing the weight on your disposable income from all those heavy assets that you don't end up using, you can change your life. I mean, ask yourself, what would it mean for you to get rid of all the weight on your shoulders due to the space you own and the car you drive? And finally, technology. We strongly believe in mobile. Most of sharing, let's use mobility, is time and location bound. Only mobile devices allow us to react in real time to where people are, where they want to go, and connect them. We believe that the next wave of sharing will require us all to go mobile. Now, where are we today? Is that happening? It's actually happening more than you might think. Every day when I look at snapshots of new companies coming up, I'm surprised. It's happening faster than probably most of you would believe. Let's look at 4 very basic human needs: mobility, work, travel, and food. In mobility, there is a few things, especially in Germany, that I think are very interesting. The first one is, I think in a lot of your neighborhoods, you might have seen Car2Go. Who of you has ever used a car-sharing platform? There's more people than own power drills. That's interesting. It's probably a very German phenomenon. So you have used car sharing. Now, what happens today with car sharing is a lot of companies buy cars and then make sure that you utilize them in your neighborhood. There is a company in San Francisco called Lyft, which goes 2 ways more drastic. Not just that you use your own car to share with others, you also share your own time with others by giving them a ride. So instead of using the current infrastructure, you tell people where you are, they tell you if they're around, and they give you a lift. The other thing is work. When you look at TaskRabbit, it's a platform that allows people to share their skills and time with others. And their #1 required task, and coming back to the power drill, is having people help them with their IKEA furniture. I thought about that, like after spending probably weeks in my own lifetime doing that very badly, how cool would that be? Another one is Postmates, which allows you to get stuff delivered. When I travel and I want to have breakfast in my apartment, people bring it to me, and it works with my device very easily. Now, I talked a little bit about travel. I think what we see is the beginning. I think that in a few years from now, the way you used to travel will have changed significantly. Finally, think about food. Friends of ours in San Francisco have opened a place called Manchuri, which allows chefs to cook for you in their idle time, to share their skills with all of us. And it's delicious. When you look at all those things together, there is one question that remains. Are people there? Do we believe that our consumers out there are ripe? They want to try that? Short answer is yes. In a recent study that we as Airbnb have done with the University of Lüneburg, you found out that more than 50% of Germans have already used alternative ways of consumption. Some of them might not know about it, because not always it's very clear what is alternative. But when you look deeper, you find out that the time is now. When I started off and said, let's think about what it would mean to revolutionize our economy, the world, we think about our old habits of consumption. The question really is, how do we react? Because it happens now, it happens today, and it will get bigger. For me, embracing change always works by trying things. And that's the one thought I would like you to leave with. Go out and try it. Travel to stay with a stranger and make a friend. And you will understand how beautiful it works. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Okay, we are going to go to our next keynote speaker. We wanted to just do a little bit of housekeeping and let you know that there are 2 other stages going